I'll now assume that you deconditioned at least one of the first two conditionings. So I'll admit a lot of the explanation you heard there and just take you through the process. This conditioning, fear associated with being rejected, is very common. Most of our clients have had it. Do you feel even the slightest anxiety when you're not included in a meeting or a gathering you'd like to go to? Do you feel any anxiety when someone you know seems to ignore you? Do you feel anxiety when you find out friends of yours did something together and didn't include you? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you probably have this conditioning. Along with getting rid of the beliefs you've already eliminated, this deconditioning should eliminate the last vestiges of anxiety when you're rejected for good. If you have this conditioning, keep going and you'll decondition it in just a few minutes. If you don't, please click Final Message for a final note before you complete the program. Now let's get rid of conditioning number 4, fear associated with being rejected. If you do experience some anxiety when you experience being rejected, I've got some good news for you. Being rejected does not inherently cause anxiety. If it did, everyone who experienced being rejected would feel anxiety, and not everyone does. So you've been conditioned to feel anxiety in that situation. Don't worry, though. You're going to decondition being rejected so it no longer causes anxiety, and you're going to do it right now. By the way, I was totally run by what people thought of me for most of my life. I would do and say things just to be accepted, and I felt considerable anxiety when I experienced being rejected. But after eliminating the beliefs and conditionings, as you did on this program, I have been concerned with what others think about me for many years. It totally changed my life. Ready to decondition your last conditioning? Okay, let's go. Now, if you're like most people, you probably first experienced anxiety associated with being rejected when your parents got annoyed or angry at you and you felt rejected. Isn't that so for you? When your parents were annoyed or angry at you, how loved did you feel? Not very, I suspect. And because the people you depended on for your very survival seemed to be withdrawing their love, you equated that with possible abandonment. In your young mind, that meant no survival. In other words, anger meant no love meant abandonment, and abandonment meant dying. You didn't consciously think all this out any more than Pavlov's dog did, but that's how the subconscious conditioning took place. Can you see that it was this perceived threat to your survival that caused the fear? It had nothing to do with rejection as such. Now I want to make a subtle distinction. Listen carefully. Because you never distinguished between the real cause of the anxiety, being rejected by your parents when you were a young child who needed them for your survival, and being rejected by anyone else as an adult, being rejected by anyone got conditioned to produce anxiety. Is it clear now that it wasn't being rejected by anyone at any age that produced your anxiety? It was experiencing rejection by your parents at an age when you needed them for your survival. Once you make this distinction, being rejected by people today will no longer cause you anxiety. I know that sounds too simple, too easy, but just stay with me and I promise this will work. It's worked tens of thousands of times. To understand even more clearly that being rejected never caused your anxiety, imagine right now that you experienced unconditional love from your parents during the first 7 years of your life. You never once felt rejected. Take a moment and make that real for yourself. Now imagine being 7 years old and being in the living room with mom and dad. Imagine further that a close friend or relative walks in the door, sees you, and says with annoyance, "What's the kid doing here?" Turning to your parents, he says, "Tell the kid to leave. I want to talk to you. I don't want this child around." You're clearly being rejected. If you had never experienced rejection from your parents up to that time, do you think this rejection would cause you to feel anxious? I don't think so. And if you didn't experience anxiety when you were rejected by someone other than your parents as a child, do you think you would today? Doesn't seem very likely, does it? Let's try one more scenario to make sure this conditioning is gone for good. Imagine being about 21, living alone in your own apartment. Imagine further that you experienced unconditional love from your parents your entire life. You never once felt rejected. Now that you're totally on your own, your parents come to visit you. After you tell them about your job, your relationships, your plans for the future, your parents suddenly look shocked and turn to you and say angrily, "You're making a mess of your life. We're leaving." And then they walk out. You're clearly being rejected. Now take your time to make this scenario totally real. If you need more time, click the pause button. As you imagine this scene, did you feel anxiety? Confusion maybe, perhaps even anger. But fear? I don't think so. Why not? You're clearly being rejected by your parents. Because you no longer depend on them for your survival. Fear is only caused by a perceived threat to your survival, unless something that isn't a threat to your survival gets conditioned to produce fear, which is what happened to rejection when you were a child. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and then let go. In your mind's eye, imagine a situation in the future that's never happened before, in which you experience being rejected. It could be a party you weren't invited to, or any other situation that makes you feel rejected. Right now, as you imagine it, do you still feel any anxiety? Say your answer out loud. You don't, do you? Please open your eyes. Once you clearly make the distinction between being rejected, which didn't cause anxiety, and being rejected by your parents at an age when you needed them for your survival, which is what really caused the anxiety, being rejected will no longer produce anxiety. Now click on the Final Message button and see the conclusion of this program.